Hi, I'm Lee Milan, and in this video we're going to look at Ableton Live's auto pan effect and also the tremolo effect. So auto pan, if we just load it in, is an automated panorama control. So panorama is literally when you move between being unified between the left and right speakers or panning more volume into one speaker than the other to the point that it's hard panned, where it just comes through one side and then there's silence through the other for either a whole song or a particular sound. So we can automate the panorama control of a track, and we can do it that way, or we have tools that are meant to do this as a kind of a modulated thing, so we can make them do some interesting creative movements. So AutoPan is exactly that. So what we have here on AutoPan is there's not too many controls. So if we just actually apply the amount control and turn that up, you'll start seeing what it's going to do to the volume of your sound over time. So basically it's going to turn up the volume of the left speaker and of the right speaker, and they're going to independently be going up and down in volume for the left and the right. So I'll just play this first sound and then we'll hear what it sounds like. Okay, so you can hear there is a panning effect of it moving between the left and the right. The more I apply, so the higher the amount to 100%, the more or stronger the actual panning effect will be. So the speed of this is dictated in two ways. We have rate, which is a kind of unsynchronized method of making that movement happen. Very good for very subtle movements or for sounds that are in the backdrop of your mix and they don't need to necessarily have like hard set timing functions to them. So if I slow that down, you'll hear the pan slow down. So you can hear that how either it's a static setting that's quite useful for movement, or if you actually were to automate that and move it over time, you could create a sense of crescendo and build to the sound that it's processing. So the rate is, as I said, unsynchronized to the actual tempo and the start and stop of the transport within Ableton Live. But if we put it into the synchronized mode, then we're actually dealing with musical measurements and everything will be synchronized. And the good thing is every time you start the tempo or every time there's a fresh start of a new bar, the actual beginning point of those movements will start at the same place each time. So it's a repeatable effect. Whereas when we're in the normal Hertz mode, which is the frequency mode where it's unsynchronized, you're not necessarily going to have a peak at the beginning of every 4 or so bars because things are a bit more free running and independent of our transport control. So aside from that, when we go back to Hertz, we have the phase control. So at the moment, the phase is 180 degrees out of phase. So when one side goes up in volume, the other side goes down. And that's how we get that hard left and right panning effect. So we can minimize the amount of effect that comes across with that by changing the phase relationship all the way to the point that we either move it to 0 or 360 degrees, which unifies the volume movement of the left and the right channel at the same time. So I'm going to move it from 180 slowly down to 100, and then I'll sweep all the way to the end and back again. Okay, so when the phase is at 100, it's unified between the left and the right, and that's where we move into the terminology change from an auto pan effect to a tremolo effect, which is volume change without any left and right difference between the two signals. So with the phase control, you may have noticed that it can be quite different in terms of how the movement feels, especially when you're listening with a good stereo set of speakers or a set of headphones, where it was moving independently 180 degrees. And as we lowered that amount, it seemed a bit more like two parts of the sounds were swaying between the left and the right speakers as well. So it's kind of like a thickening in the stereo field, that the sound seems a little bit wider when it's that side and a little bit wider when it's that side too, in terms of its perception of size. So these are all things you can tweak to kind of dial in the type of effect you want based on what sound you're processing. So the shape control basically changes from what we've got now and kind of amplifies the waveform, so it pushes it to the extremities of the upper and lower part of how loud the waveform can be at different points within its cycles. So again, I'll play that as we listen to it. Okay, so you can hear we're going from a sine, where it's a smooth crescendo of volume up and then a descending movement of the volume afterwards, to the point where it's a hard on and off movement where it becomes a square shape. And that's also referred to a gated effect, where things can be running at a certain musical interval and they're chopping on and off. So if you actually put the synchronize on now, and we set it to 16th is a good place to start actually, and we set it to a hard shape, so we increase the shape to really push it to the top and the bottoms of that boundary and square off the signal, you'll hear a kind of a very classic sound from trance music. Okay, so we're in synchronize mode. Everything's going to start at the beginning of the display of the waveform. So we're starting off at the top and then working our way down. And we can displace the starting position by using this offset control. So if I start moving this, you'll notice that the actual waveform that's controlling the movement of the autopan volume, it's actually going to start in a different position when it starts. And you'll notice that the beginning of it doesn't necessarily start at full volume and it creates a different feel. It'll be more noticeable if we go back to our sine wave. Okay, so we've covered the amount, so the depth of the autopan effect, the rate being synced or unsynced, and the benefits of choosing one over the other, the phase relationship of the control of the left-hand channel and the right-hand channel and how those volumes can be independent at different times, the shape control too, and then the offset. So let's have a look at the different types of modulation shapes we have. So we've had a sine and we've used the shaper and turned it into a square wave, but we can go for a ramp down or a sawtooth type of waveform, which will create a much more percussive sound. Now, if I quickly put the metronome on for this, you'll hear that displacement of the offset control a lot clearer. You notice at 0, it's on the point, it's really on with the beat. Every kind of hit on what would be the quantized grid is perfectly in place, but offsetting it gives you a bit more of a laid back position of where those peaks of volume are happening. And it's good as a groove tool. We can offset those and get a bit more of a feel from this sound moving with its autopan effect or tremolo effect against all the other aspects of your project too. So other aspects we have the ramp up, ramp down, so a triangle wave, which again has a different tonality because of the way it goes from its highest to lowest volume amount. And then we have a randomise effect, where we can basically just let it have a completely unpredictable nature in terms of how it's going to change our controls. So width, very similar again to that degrees that we were choosing, displacement between the left and the right channels in terms of what they're doing independently. And with just a small amount, it creates a nice amount of constant variation to a sound. And as long as the amount isn't too strong, it's not overpowering, and you have the original sound still coming through that was predictable, and then you have this randomization, in this case of the left and the right signals, just jumping up and down in volume at different points as well. So the final aspect of what we got, if we go back to our sine wave, is the invert button here. So it's in normal mode right now, and if we invert it, you notice that basically the whole waveform has just changed the polarity. So where it was going up in normal mode, it will now start on a downwards position. So that would in theory be that it's going down in volume before it goes up, rather than going up in volume before it goes down too. So again, in context, you can tweak these to really help these modifications of the sounds glue in with all the other things you've got going on in your project. So the final aspect, if we just go to Hertz for a minute, is the spin control. And what that's doing is basically setting the LFO for the left-hand channel and the right-hand channel slightly off from each other. So it'll raise the speed of the right hand a little bit and lower the speed of the left hand too. So let's just do that in context before we kind of round this up. So I'm going to put spin mode on here. So similar to when we're doing the degree offset of the left and right, except there's not so much of a tie between the rhythms between the left and the right. So you get a slightly more kind of detailed aspect of movement. So that's been the auto pan control. We can use that to add slight movement to sounds, or we can automate certain controls and go from having no application of it to the point it adds a lot to our sound, so a sense of build. It's good for building, build-up sounds to main drops in your tracks. We've looked at the way that we can reshape and choose different shapes for the actual modulation, so the waveform that changes the volume of the sound as it gets processed. We've also looked at the difference between the synchronized versions, the non-synchronized versions, and the invert button too.